Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's live session where we'll be editing one of my photos. Bad luck, everybody, but it's a good example of how to clean up something that wasn't exactly perfect in camera. Don't forget to give us a shout out in the comments where you're watching from as well. My colleague Christine is of course helping us in the background, posting links of anything that we're going to mention today, so look out for those. And also, if you want to download this file, the link is in the comments too, so if you want to have a go at the various different techniques, you are of course more than welcome to as well. So this is what we're going to deal with today. I haven't edited this for quite some time actually. I think it was taken in 2018, so it's nearly 2 years old now, so it hasn't had any of the benefits of some of the new features in Capture One 20 or 12 actually come to mention it. So it'll be interesting to see different approaches now that we have a few more tools to play with as well. Of course, hit us up with any questions that you want answered as well, and I'll do my best to take a peek into the comments every now and then. So first of all, we can see it's a little bit wonky. This was some of my first attempts at doing long exposure stuff, so I didn't necessarily have the right gear with me or the right filters and all that kind of stuff, so it's not necessarily technically perfect, but there's plenty of data here to play around with. So first of all, it's not quite straight, so I've grabbed my straightening tool up here at the top and I'm going to draw along the horizon, probably just around something like that, and let go to fix that. Next, before I start editing, I quite like to be able to see what I'm dealing with crop wise, so I'm just going to squeeze this down a little bit into a slightly more panoramic format and just cut those guys off like so. So now I'm happy with that, we can start to deal with the editing aspects of it. First impression, white balance probably is quite right. I don't know if my clock was set properly. I think this was in the evening. Yep, so around 6 o'clock at night, so it shouldn't really be that cold. So we can either eyeball in the white balance, or we could also try grabbing the color picker here and we just go on the sea and see what that does. Kind of click around a bit, or the clouds. Now there's the correct white balance, but there's also the one that you kind of like artistically as well. So I think I would probably go somewhere around there, so there's a little bit of coolness in the water still, and then in the sky we could actually warm that up later on at the end. So I'm going to start with that. Exposure wise, again, we don't want to make it look like it's daytime because it's not daytime, so it's going to be towards the darker end, but it's probably a little bit muddy, but that might be more of a case of contrast and clarity. But I will give it a little bit of a slight exposure lift and also a tiny bit of brightness as well, which is just bumping up the midtones a bit. Now when we come to the levels, generally I tend to hit auto, and that will just set my shadow and highlight points, but it might be slightly overkill. I don't know if it's kind of getting a bit too bright, so I want that kind of softness, if you like, in the highlights. So I'm actually going to not go with auto in this case and just pull that out a little bit and just tweak that slightly as well. So that's not a bad kind of start point. If we see where we've come so far, if I alt click my reset, that's before and after as it is now. So color temperature a bit better, kind of base exposure working with, but it's still flat. Can't see into the shadows down here. There should be some nice detail in these rocks, but it's kind of a bit muddy and we can't see into it. So what we're going to do next is I'm going to bump up the contrast a little bit so it's a bit more exciting, but now we're losing all that detail down here. Now, interesting fact about this shot, let's just hide me for a second, and also down here as well. Let's look in this area. Is that in Capture One 11 and 12, in terms of opening up the shadows, then we only had the shadows to deal with, or the shadow slider more importantly to work with. So if we open up the shadows, you can see the effect that it's happening. Now actually on Wednesday we're going to go deeper into this tool and really the exact difference between all these different sliders with a couple of good image examples. But if I was editing this in 11 or 12, I'd end up having to do a lot more local adjustments because I only really want to lift up the rocks, but the shadow slider has a broader effect on some of the lower midtones. So now if I go down to my black slider and let's zoom in on this guy and we open this one up, then look at that, it's just really much more targeted into those darker tones. So if I zoom back out again, then you can see the effect that's having. So it's just opening up those rocks a little bit, and I might dial in a tiny bit of shadow as well. So now we've got a good combination of just opening that up a bit. Perfect. Okay, now again, contrast wise, I've already added a bit of contrast in. I might just back that off a bit. I don't want to add too much more because otherwise, again, those shadows are going to block up a little bit. So a small amount of contrast is good. I want to deal with this rock separately in a second because that's got loads of water spray on it, so we're losing some of the detail. But what we will do over the whole shot is just add a bit of clarity, and that's separating out the different color tones in the water quite nicely. So good start so far. Let's see, I was just looking, I was having a laugh at Nigel because he said, that's better when I hid my face. So I know I've cut my own hair, but there's no need to be like that, Nigel. But I will hide myself periodically, don't worry. Let's have a look. And again, Basement Studio says, I like the bluer temp. And, you know, that's a good point. Each to their own how it works. So as I said, there's the correct color and there's the one that we prefer. So maybe let's just cool it down a bit for Basement's purposes. Yeah, I think maybe you're right, actually. All right, let's continue and think what we're going to do next. So base-wise, it's pretty good. But if we zoom in on, this is actually called Bird Rock. You can probably guess why, out in California. And it's just losing some of the detail. There's a load of salt spray up there, but it'd be nice just to enhance this a little bit. If we go down to this one, that's already got tons of detail in it and we can see what's going on. This is, yeah, 20-second exposure you can see down the bottom. But let's see if we can lift this up a little bit. Now, if I was to sharpen the whole photo, then we're probably going to end up over sharpening everything else. So we want to treat this area a little bit separately. Now, not entirely sure what's going to make that look correct. So I'm going to make myself a new filled layer here, like so, and press M on my keyboard. And then basically that's added a whole mask over the shot. So whatever I do now with my sliders, it's going to affect the entire photo. But what this does give me the ability to do is kind of play with a few different things to see what's going to happen on this rock. So first of all, we know it's a bit flat. So what happens if I add contrast? It's a bit better, but I don't want to lose the detail in the darker areas. So I'll be gentle with that. We can add a bit more clarity. Now I'm only looking what's going on here. I don't care if it's going to ruin my sky or anything like that. I'm going to open up the blacks a bit more as well, and then also maybe the shadows. And we're going to add some structure, which is just going to help pick out the details on the rocks a little more. Now obviously too much, it's going to look ugly, but we're going to go like this. Now, right now, if I go to this point, you see we're getting a little nasty halo around the birds. Now that's fine, because when I kind of decide where I want this adjustment, I'm just going to make sure to miss that edge. So I'm just not going to miss that. I'm not going to apply the adjustment along that edge because that's now looking a bit too over sharp. If we turn this layer off, like so, and back on, then we can see what it's doing to enhance here. Now, as I said, it's affecting the whole shot, so it's going to kind of have a slight negative impact on making everything a bit too contrasty. So I just want to bring it up onto the rock itself. So let's name this Bird Rock. Very imaginative name. Let's just get me out the way for a second. And we're going to right click and say Clear Mask, not invert, clear. So that's going to get rid of that mask, but it's going to keep my structure adjustment there. It's going to keep my clarity adjustment and anything else which I happen to dial in, like the black slider and so on. So let's say Clear Mask. You'll see the image change, and now we can brush it back in where we want to have it. So let's grab my brush, and it's going to be nice and soft. And what I'm going to do is make sure that inner circle doesn't go onto over the edge, because I want to make sure it's kind of feathering off before we hit that edge, so I don't get that over sharpening. Now, to prevent my adjustment getting brushed in one hit, we're going to make sure, of course, that flow is turned down nice and low, and that's going to let me build up the adjustment on every brush stroke. So 5 essentially meaning 5% each time you move your pen or mouse across the photo. So now I can brush back and forth, and then that will gradually pop in my adjustment. Now, depending how strong I want it, I can brush more or less, but I'm just making sure my inner circle stays away from that edge so we don't over sharpen it too much. Let's see, so go back and forth a bit more. Now, it might not look like much is happening, but we can turn the layer on and off in a second. I was only looking for a subtle effect. I didn't want to go too crazy, just more to kind of get rid of that haziness. Okay, so if we turn the layer off, bird rock going off, let's just look in the center and on, then you can see before and after like so. Now, if you think you've overcooked it, then we can turn this down and we can go anywhere from no adjustment all the way to 100, like so. So that's where we are at the moment. Now, if we turn that layer off, you can see just what it's doing in the distance. Now, as I said, we decided amongst ourselves that we'd cool it down a little bit, but I might want a bit more warmth back in the sky, or maybe I want to play around with the color grading somewhat. So let's go to our color balance tool. This guy here, very useful. But before we do, we're going to color grade on a layer, because that gives us a bit more flexibility as well. So let's make a new filled layer again, and we call this color grade, or whatever code you decide. And if I press M on my keyboard, that reminds us all that it's going to happen on the entire shot. So what do I want to do? I think I would like to have, in my shadow tab, we're going to go for cool down the shadows a bit, but to contrast that in the highlights, we're just going to warm them up a touch as well. Now, maybe that's a bit too far, so let's go around to a more tealy color like so. And if we turn this on and off, then it's just subtle, but it's just warming up the sky a little bit more. We could always push that a bit harder, actually, like so. Now, normally at this point, I kind of step back a little bit and, you know, dislike what I've done or whatever, and then try and sort of reevaluate. So now if I go back to the background, then I think it could probably even have, well, actually, if I put a bit too much clarity in, I don't like what it's doing to the front, but I like what it's doing if we look at the C in the middle. I quite like what it's doing there. So rather than put it on the whole shot, let's balance that to around that point, and then we make another filled layer, and we call this extra clarity, like so. So now looking at the C once again, I'll put this where I think it looks good, maybe go more than I would expect, and then same process as we did before, right click and say clear mask, grab my brush, helps if you click it, nice and big, and then I can just kind of gradually feed in a bit more clarity to those spots like so, and that just helping to bring out the structure and so on in the sea. We could even do a little bit in the sky if we felt like it. Will it do any harm? A little bit on the top and around it. It's only a gentle amount. It's not like the full kind of whack of adjustment in there. So let's turn that off and back on, so you can just see where it's made that difference. Okay, couple of questions, and then we will look at the final result almost. Unsung hero, so this is a question that's coming from my colleague, so you won't see it on screen. On a mask layer, if you add a radial mask, how do you delete it? Do you have to delete the whole layer? Yes, so if you've got a radial mask, let's just make a new layer, and we've made our radial mask or whatever. If you want to get rid of that, we could also right click and say clear mask, and then it's gone as well. So you don't necessarily have to delete the layer, because then you have to go through that process of of making the whole layer again. So that's a different way to do it. But good question. Let's have a look. Could we add haze? I just saw that question from Jim. Well, if you want sort of the opposite of contrast, then of course you can go, if we go to the background, we can have negative contrast. I'm just pushing it harder so you can see the difference. But if you wanted that kind of softer effect, then you would do the opposite what I did. So less clarity, less contrast, levels, and so on. So that's something else you can think about as well. This one often comes up, Digital Friday, clarity versus structure, when to use which. So remember, clarity is a contrast adjustment, but it's helping the mid-tone contrast. So it bumps up the mid-tone contrast, but without affecting your shadows and highlights. Whereas structure will help to enhance. So if we go down to this, these rocks are quite sharp, if I remember. So if we look at structure here, if I bump this up aggressively, then you can see the difference that it's happening. So it's enhancing anything which has fine detail or an edge. So it's kind of like clarity on a micro level almost, but think of clarity as a mid-tone contrast adjustment. So it depends really what you want to do as well. Meister, that's probably something we could talk about on Wednesday when we talk about HDR as well. So curves versus levels. Well, really levels is step one. So you set the levels on the image itself, and then curves allows you to make specific contrast changes, for example. So it's two different things. So levels will give you the correct tonal range for the shot. Curves will let you move on from that and adjust the contrast thereafter. Bill, yes you would. If you wanted to add any element, like any kind of pixel adjustment, if you like, then that would be like a round trip to Photoshop, Affinity Photo, or something like that. Unless you had a bird in the shot already and you wanted to clone it, then you could use a clone layer. But you need, you know, some kind of pixels there already to clone it. Nice. Okay, I'm gonna show you how we started. So let's just bring up the browser for a second, like so. Let's make a virtual copy. So we're going to say new variant right here. So that's what we ended up with just now, and then that's how we started. Quite a different look between the two. Let's hide the browser. Let's hide the tools. So obviously original on the left, right rather, edits on the left, as you can see. Now this is what I came up with yesterday, I think. So not hugely dissimilar, actually. A bit more of a contrasty mood yesterday, I can see as well. But I can never edit the same way twice, to be honest. Now, if you want to have a try yourself, that photo is in the comments and you can download it. It's from a Sony A7. I think it might be an original A7, to be honest. Let's see. Great lens, 90mm macro. No, A7R Mark III, my mistake. So an A7R Mark III. So plenty of resolution and dynamic range to play around with as well. Okay, last couple of questions and then we'll go. Lorraine, any sort of getting started things like that, go to our learning hub, learn.captureone.com, and you'll find a getting started category, and then there you'll be able to just learn basic things like that. So that's the best way to figure that out, Lorraine. And I guess a good question, because one of the messages that I must remind you is that currently our April promotions are ending at the end of April, hence the name April promotions. So that's 25% off new Capture One licenses and 30% off upgrades. And that expires on Thursday. So the difference between 12 and 20, so you saw a little hint of that, and come back Wednesday as well when we talk in more detail about this tool set here. So you can really do a great deal more with those various different sliders. I know it sounds kind of slightly silly to just assume that two sliders can make all the difference, but it really can. To be honest. So 12 and 20, we've got new high dynamic range sliders, and we've also got new possibilities in the color editor as well. So the new basic color editor and direct color editor where you can click on the shot and edit as well. Now there's not a huge amount of color in this shot, so that's why I didn't use it today. But those two examples I give you are great additions to Capture One 20 as well. So come back on Wednesday for some more examples on really the difference that HDR tool makes as well. Okay, I'm going to pull out one more question, and then we can all carry on with the start of our week. Let's see. I'm just going to scroll up and try and pick one from random. Hi Wesley, that's a name from the past. I remember Wesley. Sorry, that's just a little personal thing on my start. So very nice to see you, Wesley. That's a good one from Harold. There we go. Rather than a brush, how about a luminosity mask? Yeah, and if you would have watched one of the broadcasts last week where we edited Farzan's shot out in Sri Lanka, that was a great example for luminosity masking. So sometimes it's worth if we just do a quick filled layer like so. Let's turn on our Grayscale Mask. So that's Command M, or sorry, Option M, and look at Luma Range. Helps if you click it. Then we could see exactly what we could pull out here. So white is the masked, sorry, black is the masked area. So if we wanted our highlights, we could pull those out. So it depends really. Sometimes, Harold, it's nice to be able to use the Luma mask, I think, when it's very cut and dry. But in this case, I just wanted to isolate one spot. So I took the decision that it would be faster for me to just manually brush that in than play around with the luminosity mask. So, but it is, of course, your choice. All right, many thanks for joining us today on this Monday. Don't forget to come back on Wednesday when we look more closely at the HDR tool as well. Don't forget to download this file if you want to try it. Don't forget the promotions end on Thursday, so 25% off new, 30% off upgrades as well. So take advantage of those while you can. So many thanks for joining me today, and hope to see you all on Wednesday. Have a great Monday and see you soon. Take care. Bye now.